Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown and welcome to the Caregiving Book Club podcast. During this podcast, we interview authors of caregiving books to give you a behind the scenes look at what it takes to write and publish a book for family caregivers. So joining me today is Lacresha Davis. She's the author of Questions Now or Regrets Later. Lacresha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, so what was the inspiration for your book?
So my mom passed away unexpectedly. And so when it came time to get all the details together for her funeral, I realized that I was missing a lot of details. And so as time went on and the more I started to plan, the more I realized, even though we talked about it all the time, because my mom was a CNA for over 30 years, and she loved what she did, but she would always say, hey, I'm seeing things happen and I want to make sure you know what to do. But even with that, I wasn't asking enough of the right questions. So when it came time to actually plan her funeral, there were a few gaps in her history and I had to go and do a little bit more digging. So yeah, her passing away was the inspiration, and planning the funerals where like every section of the book came into play.
So I want to ask you a question about your mom's death certificate, because that actually was an obstacle you encountered because you weren't aware of your mom's birthplace. And it was because of something traumatic that had happened during your mom's childhood. How did you figure that out? That detail that's so important, but yet it's elusive. How did you get that detail?
So I actually had my mom's phone, and she had recorded some information. It's so funny when I think back to certain conversations we had, and I know that was God prompting me to talk to my mom about certain things. And so she had started recording herself talking about her story. And so you can tell where there were like 3 takes where she started it and then she stopped. And then the very last take, she recorded just enough information where I actually got the actual birthplace of where she was from. Because I went to her brother, and keep this in mind, all her siblings got split up when we're put in different places. So I went to her brother and he had actually given me the wrong place. And so it was because of that piece of information in her phone that I actually found where she was actually from.
Wow. So anyone who's had an unexpected death in the family understands, and I don't know how else to describe this, but it's awful going through that funeral planning process and managing all those details.
Yes.
It's really terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your takeaway from that experience was it doesn't have to be this hard.
Yes. Yes. There's and of course there's information out there, but if your family's healthy, you know, if you've got your mom and your dad here, or if you got if everybody's here and you haven't really experienced that, then your first thought is not going to be necessarily, let me make sure I have all the exact details. Now, some people that are really proactive are, but like I said, we talked, so I thought we were okay. And then it's when you go through the actual experience and you realize you didn't have enough information. So
who do you envision being the reader and user of your book?
Oh, that's a great question. The reader and user for me would technically, I think it would be women, well, families, like if you've got young kids, so families with kids, blended families. And then I'm finding people that are between the age of like 30-ish, like I'll say maybe 32 to 35 years old, all the way in between like 50 on up. There's a gap in there where there's a generation of kids, then they're like, I don't want to talk about my parents not being here, or I don't want to talk about me not being here. And so it's like this gap of like, and there's a fear of like, it's going to make me feel sad if I talk about this, or I don't know what to say. And that's when I realized like, yes, you may feel sad. And it's kind of sad to think about what your life would not be like, what your life would be like with you not being here. But what I tell them is like, to not have the answers will make you feel 1,000 times worse, you know? So I was like, as much as it's going to make you feel sad, you should lean into that so that you can make sure you're doing everything in your power to have all the information in place as best as you know how.
And just that story about that one detail about your mom's life and
Yes.
how much that impacted what you cannot do when you don't have the death certificate is immense.
Yes, it was, yeah, couldn't do anything, couldn't close bank accounts, could not do anything. So it's like the most, it's like the lifeblood of getting everything closed out.
When did you know that you had a book and that you wanted to write it?
So I've always been writing since I was 10 years old. I've always like just written little stories here and there. I write poetry. But when I started to get hit, it felt like a wave. Everything that was coming at me. So first it was my mom actually being gone, like just the disbelief of her actually not being there. So that was a wave for me. And then getting a call from the hospital and saying, so here's one of the scenarios that happened. My mom talked to me and said, if anything happens to me, your brothers are not going to be equipped for this. She's like, I just know my stepdad, she said, she's like, he's gonna shut down. And that's exactly what happened. So my stepdad shut down. They called him first and he was just not ready to accept it. And so he didn't say anything to anybody. He just kind of walked out the house. And so nobody knew my mom was gone for a few hours. And the hospital then called me and they were saying, and she started talking to me as if I had already known. So I was like, oh my goodness, are you saying my mom's already passed? And so the lady was like, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew because we called your dad first. So it's like all those scenarios coming into play. And then I remember just as everything was really starting to finally be subtle and kind of dissipate, that I thought to myself, other people have to know about this. Like they have to know how to talk about this, because something I started finding also was like, oh yeah, I would talk to somebody and like, oh, I went through that, or I went through that. And I'm like, I've never heard these stories, you know? And I was like, if somebody had sat down and said, hey, these are things that you could possibly face if you guys are not well equipped, I would have totally listened. I would have like had a family meeting and I would have been like, look, let's get this all squared away right now. So that's where I was like, I have to tell people, let them know how important this is.
How long did it take you to actually create the form, meaning the book?
It took me right about a year. And it's just because I had to get an editor. I like in my mind, like I have things and sometimes I put too many words. And so I was like, I need an editor. So it was finding somebody that could edit through my book and that was efficient with that and quick about it. And then it was going back and forth and adding things and taking things away. So it took me a good year to like really have a solid form of the book where I was like, okay, I like this and it flows well.
And then you know what, I'm not sure if it was as a decision, but you went the self-publishing route, meaning that you just created a Kindle version and a paperback version and you sell it on Amazon without an agent or a publisher. And I wondered if that was a decision that you had made intentionally, or was it just, I'm going to get this out. The easiest and quickest way is just do it myself.
Yeah, so it was definitely the easiest and quickest way that I could think of. I have thought about trying to find a publisher to help me with the marketing, but just getting it, like, it was just important for me to write it down and have it completed to the best of my ability, which is why I went ahead and hired an editor so that I made sure it made sense. Because me looking at it, and I remember the first draft that I had, I thought it was like, this is amazing, this is great. And I let my husband go through it and he was like, okay, there needs to be some help here because it's not flowing right. You know, so yeah, I got outside help to make sure that it flowed well and that it made sense to other people.
Okay, so there's actually two questions I want to ask, but I'm going to go with the first one, which is how hard it is to show your work to someone else. It sounds so easy. Oh, I gave it to my husband to review, but that is, I want to just say, I think that's really a terrifying experience because you think I've worked so hard on this and now I'm
Yes.
giving it to someone else to critique. Oh. How did you work through the worry about showing your work to your husband and then hiring an editor?
So I honestly, me personally, I wasn't worried about showing it to him, because it was one of those things where you have such a passion for it. You're like, whatever fear you may have, that dissipates. And you're like, it doesn't matter. This has to get done as quickly as possible. So now he did say a few times, he's like, please don't be offended. Like, I'm just trying to make this the best quality. So maybe when he was going through it and telling me to fix things here and there, and I kept having to go back like a solid month of that. Like at the end of the night, once the kids were in bed, I'd be like, okay, I've gone through everything. Would you look through it again? And he'd have like another 10 or 12 things that he'd say, okay, this needs to be fixed. This is before an editor. So yeah, so it was, for me, it was really no fear. I was like, for me, it was really finding somebody outside of my husband, but that was passionate about editing. Like it's not just like some, a quick job. Like they are really enjoying what they're doing. And I'll tell you, it was an interesting story how I found the editor, if you want to hear it.
Yes, absolutely.
So I was working at a business, a broker business basically. And the guy that was training me, he was so nice. Like we had such great conversations. And I randomly was telling him, like, after my mom had passed, I came back to work after 2 weeks of getting everything settled. And so we kind of slowly settled into conversations about how everything went. And so I was telling him about this book that I had put together thus far. And so he said, oh, my wife, she loves to edit things. He was like, this is what she does for a living. I forget what company she works for. But he's like, they literally contract her out just to go through their content and make sure that it makes sense, that it flows well. She checks the spelling. He's like, I can ask her. And I was like, yes. I was so excited about it. And so we had a meeting, and I was telling her my heart, and like, it was just a match made in heaven because she's so adamant about it. She has like such a love for spelling. And I was like, you were meant to be here at this time talking to me. I was so grateful. So it was good working with her because I said, whatever I need to fix, I will fix. Thank you for being passionate about what you're doing. It means so much to me.
There's a marketing guru I follow. His name is Seth Godin. And one of the things he always says is just ship it, meaning just put it out there, get feedback.
Yeah.
And there's a way to ship it without putting it into the public domain, in essence. And that's what you did with your husband and your editor. You allowed them to give you feedback. And I'm curious, when you see the final product now, how do you feel about that final product versus when you think about that first iteration of it?
I'm very proud of it, because I feel like, again, it's just one of those things that you're so passionate about. Because for me, it's an honor to my mom. This is my way to honor my mom. And I dedicated the book to her. So like when I look at it, I feel like she's looking at it too. And she's like, good job. Like, thank you for doing that,
Yeah.
So it makes me very happy. I'm very proud of it.
So you are a lifelong writer and you're a poet. So what was different about writing this book versus writing poetry?
So poetry, and I've been doing that since I was young. When I was younger, it was a thing of like, if I heard a word, I realized, and this has got to be a God thing, but I realized that I always lock into words. So if somebody is saying something or I'm watching a movie and I'm feeling inspired, I will hear a certain word and I'll lock into that word and a whole poem will come from that word. With this, it was more from an emotion. And so the emotion was saying, there's something within me that has to come out. So it wasn't necessarily like a short poem. It was more of like, I know this is a lot of information that has to be in a book form versus just like a poem and hearing a certain word and feeling like I have something short and sweet to say. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Absolutely. And I also think there's a rhythm to poetry that's very different than a rhythm in a book. They
Yes.
both have a rhythm. It's just a different type of cadence, so to speak, and beat and speed.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I'll agree. Because with a poem, it can easily come within, I don't know, I've had it come as quick as 5 to 10 minutes. And I just write everything out and I might go back and kind of like refine the words a little bit until it's like saying exactly what I wanted to say. But with the book, it was like, okay, I have to talk about this. I have to talk about this, so it was, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like there's a certain way, a process how to do each thing. Absolutely.
And your book takes patience. So you
Yes.
stuck with it for a year to get that final version that you feel really proud of. I'm just curious if there were times during that 12-month period that you thought, oh, I just can't. I just can't.
Well, no, and I've had that with some of my other books, where I'm like, man, I don't know, and I'll set it down for a little while. But with this, I was just driven. Like I was driven to get this done as quickly as possible. I actually thought I would get it done faster than a year, but like with the edits, I just realized like, okay, whatever it takes to make sure it's done properly. Because the one thing I do not want is somebody going through and they're like, oh, this doesn't make sense, and then it's distracting from the book. So for me, it was just, I was so driven to get it done that when the kids were asleep or when my husband's at work or whatever, and I get up early in the morning. This has been my routine since I was little. I get up at 4 in the morning, like clockwork, like my eyes just pop open. And so I always take that as a sign that has something to say to me. So I will get up, and if it's for me to spend time with God, then I'll do that. Or if it's for me to write, then I'll spend time writing until it's time for me to get the kids up.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, so let's talk about marketing, which I think is the hard piece,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you're looking to create a buzz about the book. You're looking to really connect with future readers of the book, and that is a consistent
Yeah.
outreach.
Yeah.
So what have you figured out about marketing?
Um, you have to talk to everybody. Like, whether you think they're going to be interested or not, at the very least, they can just say no, no, thank you, or they'll let you know, oh, that's not really for me. And I don't take it personal. In the beginning, I was like, why don't they want to listen? Why don't they want to listen to me? But then I just realized like that's just not where they're at. But for the right prospect, they're going to lock in. So yeah, for me, it was just and I had a fear in the beginning. It's so weird. I was like, I don't know where this came from, but I have spoken in front of huge crowds my whole life. Like it's just something I was kind of groomed to do doing certain things. Um, and even where my child goes to school, they have me speaking to their investors because I convey a message in a certain way that they know that they're going to understand where the value of what they're doing. But to go up to, for the longest time, to go up to somebody that I did not know and be like, hey, and it just felt like I was intruding on their space. So I had to find my rhythm in talking to people. I realized like for me, it wasn't beneficial to just go up straight to people and be like, hey, so I'm doing this, blah, blah, blah. It was more of like easing into a conversation. And once we got there, letting them know it was more about education, not me trying to sell you this book. Like, because for me, it's really about helping people be aware and equipping them so that they have the right information to make informed decisions. So that's what helped me, is like kind of shifting my mindset about how I was approaching people.
Yeah, I often think it's not necessarily about making a sale, but it's
Mhm.
creating the connection.
Yes, that's perfect. I like the way you said
Yes,
that.
the connections are so meaningful. And what you've just talked about is because you were having a conversation with individuals, it helped you actually then have a better conversation with the next
Mhm.
individual, because you
Yes,
paid attention to what landed, what words, what phrases, what
yes,
actually helped them think, oh, this isn't scary,
right,
this is powerful.
right. Yeah. And and it's just a matter of just starting, because you will figure your rhythm out once you start. And so when I started, and which I was told you before, like I was using a lot of the wrong words in the beginning. So it was creating anxiety. Like I could just see it in people's face when so I quit starting off by saying, so my mom passed away all of a sudden. And that was like my start. And every time it was like, oh, like what's happening, and there would be sympathy or whatever, but it just wasn't the right way to start. So I had to start with, or once it started flowing that way, using positive words. So I started saying, making good decisions, equipping you people to make informed decisions, things that make you feel good about yourself. So it was just a learning curve. about how to use the words, about how to engage with people and and trying to find and just knowing that everybody's a potential customer, but not being offended if they're not.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Again, because you just want to create a connection because they might not feel like they're a customer today, but you don't know
Right.
what's going to happen in 6 months where like, oh, I get
Yes.
it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I get what Lacresha was talking about. I need to get her book.
Yeah. Yes. And it's happened just like that. My husband, he does lifts sometimes and he'll just leave the book in the car. And this lady just leaned in and she was like, "Oh, what's this book?" And so she immediately seen it and went through and she's like, "I want to buy this book right now." So she like scanned it and she purchased the book. And like I went and I met with her and it was so funny because she was like, her mom is going through is possibly going to have to go through cancer. They were waiting for the results, but it just put her mindset in a different frame of thinking. And so when she's seeing that, that immediately connected with her. And she's like, "I've got to talk." So we had the best conversation. I got to pray with her for her mom, and just like you just never know where it's going to lead you. But just like we're saying, just putting it out there, and just the right people that need it, they will find it.
Okay, so what's next for you with your writing career?
So I've already I've already got something else in the works. It's kind of in combination with questions now or regrets later. Because some people have most of their stuff together. So the next question that I like to ask them is like, okay, have you taken the time to write notes to your children, if you have children, or to your loved ones, whomever that might be? Because sometimes when things happen, and let's say you have it all written out, it helps you to know that there's something that you can go back and read, something that they left for you. And it just gives you a sense of comfort. And so I've created a book. It's called Notes for My Daughter and Notes for My Son. And it's just the questions that you want to ask, or not really necessarily ask, it's questions you want to ask yourself so that you are leaving like the most valuable notes for them. So I talk about things like your integrity, your life growing up. And it's not like in-depth questions. It's like 4 spaces for you to just leave a synopsis. And then talking about things like your core values, like why these things are important to you, your thoughts on being a woman, on being a man, integrity, all the things that you want your kids to know, and maybe your hopes and dreams for them in the future. Just leaving them something that says, "Hey, here's a little bit more about myself, and I hope that this helps you in the future whenever you need it."
My mom died in August, and I think about the different possessions that I've kept from her, and checks that she wrote to me are
Mm,
things that I keep because it speaks to how much
yes,
she was invested in me and her generous nature and how supportive she was. So it's
yeah,
not necessarily a note, but it feels like a
yeah,
note.
yes, because it's like the personal handwriting.
Yes. And the other piece of it is her handwriting changed as her disease process worsened. So
Mm,
I see these checks that she wrote toward the end of her life, and I see the courage in still saying, I'm going to write this check. It's hard for me. It's
yeah.
upsetting to me because it doesn't look the same as it did a year before, but I'm still going to write the check.
Wow, that's amazing. I always find it really interesting, like what people keep after somebody has passed away and how it brings them a sense of peace. Something that I actually keep for myself is this necklace. This is my mom's. I have her ring, and when I'm doing things that I feel like are in her honor, I always wear her ring. But like things like this, these conversations, I wear this in honor of her. Um, but also like I carry the conversations we had, because when my mom was equipping me, I was so young a lot of the time, and I remember thinking like, I don't know why she's telling me this stuff. You know what I mean? Like we've got so much time, and every time I face something with my daughter, I think about conversations I had with my mom, and I always tell my friends, I'm like, I'm so grateful for her giving me those conversations, because I pull from those when I'm feeling bankrupt. Like I absolutely pull from those. Excuse me, and it helps me, and it lets me know how important it is to talk to my daughter so she will know as well. So it's not just the stuff, but it's also her words that like they keep me going long after she's been gone.
Yeah. Lacresha, this was fantastic. So I want to just let our viewers and listeners know the name of your book again. It's Questions Now or Regrets Later. And where could individuals who are watching us and listening to us learn more about your work?
So I have a website. It's called, well, you go to www.notyourtypicalplanner.com. And I have my book here, and I designed it in such a way that it's really bright and it's big. One of the things that I faced is that my mom, like I said, she wrote everything out on the computer, but she did have a hard copy of it. And again, there was so much chaos going on in her house, I couldn't find it. So my thought was, you want to have something that's not necessarily bland, but something that's so bright, your eye goes right to it. And then I also wanted to make it big enough that, like, again, it's going to stand out. So yes, you can visit me on my website, www.notyourtypicalplanner.com. And then from there, I'm on YouTube, allaboutjournals.com on YouTube, and I'm also on Facebook.
Hey,
Under this.
and I'll include links in our show notes. So Lacresha, thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Thank you. And I said this, but your voice is just so comforting. I just love to listen to you talk. Like, it really brings me peace. It's almost like seriously, it feels like medicine.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome. So when your next book comes out, we'll do it again.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'm excited.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening, and keep reading because we want to connect to readers. Keep reading. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.